Welcome back to the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, co-author of this language and composition textbook from AMSCO Perfection. I want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters whose names are here. If you're interested in supporting the Garden of English via Patreon, you could actually check out this link right here at the bottom of the screen. Today, we are going to talk about a question that I get a lot. How do you do peer feedback in your classroom? How do you actually give feedback in your classroom? And then what about like revision and things like that? So I was like, you know what? Let's have a conversation because I know that Brielle does some cool stuff. So Brielle, why don't you introduce us to you? Tell us about your work history just real quickly, and then we'll get right into things, okay?
Yeah, sure. Brielle, I think I'm on my 14th year of teaching. I work down at a giant high school in Texas. I think we have about 3,500 students. And this year I have 180 students that fill my chairs in my classroom.
Let's actually talk about what you do for peer feedback with your kids to get them engaged and involved. Because a lot of times when I work with teachers, they consistently ask, like, how do you get kids to read your comments? How do you get kids to take whatever this is seriously? And I think that there are creative ways to hold them accountable for this that don't just, turn you into some curmudgeon that's like, just do what I say. You know what I mean? And also, I think that there are other ways to get kids highly involved before you even give them grades, or let them see their grades so that they're not only thinking about numbers, but also feedback. And I know that you and I share that kind of same philosophy. So
Yeah.
walk us through the process of what gets them to a self-eval, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so one of the things in my classroom that I spend a great deal of time on, one, I truly believe that peer editing and also constant revision of the same piece of writing has been really helpful to my students.
Actually, I know that I'm interrupting, but that's one of the reasons why we built the writing portions into our textbook the way that we did. The AMSCO Lane book is so that kids would revise the same piece consistently to see how that works. But anyway, pardon my interruption.
No, and like you said, for my students, we realized a lot of times we were just writing and moving on, and the mistakes they're making in that first piece, they keep showing up despite
Right.
no matter how much feedback I gave them, they're still doing it. And I was like, you know what? One day it just, guys, we're not moving on from this essay until we get it.
That's right.
All
We're
right.
English teachers. We're not math teachers. We don't just move on, right? We
Yeah,
make sure the kids
exactly.
get it
Sorry,
for
we did
sure.
that formula. Nope. Whoa.
That's right.
So my students, before they get a new essay, they will have seen their timed right a minimum of 4 times. They have worked with their timed right a minimum of 4 times.
Wow, no kidding.
So I'm going to show you how so they get their timed right, they write it, I pick it up. They don't get to take it home, because if I let them take it home, they would spend all night obsessing over it, and I don't want that. I need a brain break, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I need them to step away from it, come back with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
So they come in the next day, and then everybody will pick up a piece of paper. I happen to have a green paper today just because it's a busted printout that I used, and this is what we're using.
Hey,
My students, every year that I get them, if they didn't have me freshman year, they're just like, I'm sorry, you want me to what?
Yeah.
Like, guys, we're folding paper today.
Right. It's like,
So-
craft time. Come on, we're better than that.
I know. They're like, wait, Lavelle, we know you. We don't do fun stuff in here. And I was like, I didn't say what we're about to do was fun. I just said we're folding paper.
That's right.
So I get a piece of paper. I have them fold it like this little, whatever food group is attached to it. Is a hot dog? We're gonna say
hot dog, taco, like it's cool.
Whatever it is, I'm rolling with that food group. Then I have them fold it again.
All right, so that's our second fold that way. Yep.
Yep. Then we fold it one more time.
All right.
So it looks like this. If you let your AP students obsess about the folds, you will never move on in your lesson.
It's the same thing with drawing stuff. It's like, just
ever.
use stick figures. We just want to get something out there, right?
And then our last fold, we're going to just fold this in half so that we have 2 pieces of the paper.
Right. So we're basically turning that into rows and columns, essentially.
Yeah,
so
basically it's just rows and columns. Some kids are like, ooh, I'm going to make a fan. And I'm like, great, as long as you fold it in half, I don't care how you get there.
Yeah.
So we've got something that looks a lot like this.
Yep.
Now on this side of the paper, let me see. We're gonna say that our student is, we're gonna call him Tim. And then I'm writing on the left-hand side of the paper. So Tim, today, what do you think we need to do some peer eval for in our essay? What thing do you struggle with, or what do you want to look for?
All right, so you're basically asking your students, and I'll answer that question in just a minute, but you're asking your students to actually think about what they should be looking for based on the instruction of that unit.
This gets their buy-in.
So, right, so if they know that they were learning how to find rhetorical choices as before they wrote their rhetorical analysis essay, that could be one of the first things they bring up, right? You know what? Hey, let's make sure that the essays all have rhetorical choices in them. So that'll be my first suggestion, rhetorical choices.
All right, rhetorical choices. And then I'm going to call on an imaginary Samantha, and she's going to say, I want to look at evidence. And for that, for my students, we could spend 5 class hours on one single piece of evidence if I let them.
Yeah.
Then one student, I'll ask them, they'll say coherency. And I use the word coherency more than line of reasoning.
Yep.
For my students, it's not that I don't understand line of reasoning. It's just that when I try to explain it using those terms, they're just like, so you want me to write a thesis statement?
Yeah.
Yes, but no, that's not the answer to what I'm trying to get.
And we're looking for coherence and cohesion, and that's really what the kids need to look for there. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so they're pulling out these ideas that are coming from the classroom. So they're actually forced then to self-reflect on all of the lessons that have gone up to the timed writing, because now they're the ones that it seems are selecting what they're going to be doing essentially their peer editing for. And
I think unlike a lot of teachers, this is the first time that my students will ever see the AP rubric.
Yeah.
They don't see this at any point until after I give them their first time grade.
And I actually, I'm the same way. I completely agree with that, just so you know, because, you know, I'm like, I'm going to teach you how to be a good writer. The good writer could fit into the rubric. So just relax.
Exactly. You know? Exactly. Yeah. And so then we get finished. So we've got all of our imaginary kids on here. And now your paper looks like this. You can see, well, I should have chosen a better color, but
that's okay.
This is Tim's peer eval sheet. Now this sheet is going to be stapled on top of his essay. And then Tim's essay and Tim's peer feedback sheet are going to be passed to a different student. And the first thing that we talked about was that we wrote on our peer eval sheet was rhetorical choices.
Right.
So the student reading that essay is looking for those rhetorical choices. And I have trained my students that the first place you need to look for those rhetorical choices is that thesis statement.
Yep.
So we'll say whoever graded it, they always make a note about the thesis statement. They'll say rhetorical choices. Sometimes they put a check. Yep. And then they'll write the word body. And then they'll say, yeah, there's no choice here. And then, you know, if there's no, in that topic sentence where you've got that choice listed, the students are like, they can't necessarily articulate why that topic sentence works, but they can't pick up on why it doesn't match. And so eventually, Tim, can you see the writing on this?
I can actually, yeah, thesis.
All right.
And it looks like we get a check there, and then
so check is there, and then we get a body. So this is going to be passed around to as many different students as there are for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 things that we're looking for.
So once the kid looks for the rhetorical choice one and makes the note, like, yes, they are in the thesis, but no, they're not, or they're not in the topic sentence, they'll say, where are your rhetorical choices? Or if they are there, they'll be like, oh, there is one here. And then once they do the rhetorical choice, they pass to another student. So another set of eyes.
And I set a timer too.
Okay.
Because otherwise, depending on, especially, and I save coherency and cohesion. Yep. If my students do want to talk about that, it comes up every time. I save that last because that student now needs to read the entire paper for its content, basically. Yep. Does it make sense? Does it have a line of reasoning? And so I save that. So this gets passed around, and Tim will get his back. Tim will get the opportunity to look at all of the notes, and the students aren't ever allowed to just write, yes, there was a thesis. That's a cop-out in my classroom. And my gosh, they'll be doing an extra lot of what's a good thesis,
Right.
and they'll never do it again.
Right. So if they have the rhetorical choice part of it and they have the thesis there, they do have to at least be able to say, yes, the choices are there. And perhaps, even if you think that your kids might be struggling with that, we could even say, list out the choices that are in the thesis. If you're the type of teacher that teaches that. I know that there are some teachers that don't. On test day, I have no problem with that there being choices in the thesis, you know. But even then, right? If you're not the type of teacher that teaches that, but choices do have to show up in the paper at least. For someone that's that type of a teacher, you could even tell the kids, provide the evidence, record from the actual essay and the peer editing that the choices are there. Yeah. And if they're not there, just write, what the heck?
I will qualify that when I say choices, I'm talking about those modes of development and those rhetorically accurate verbs.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Saying. Yes.
That if I see the word personification in a thesis statement, I've not done my job, and my student doesn't understand the way I'd like them to write. Yeah. Now, on exam day, literally, if by God they have forgotten all strategies, I'm not there, and they have other stuff they can use to save themselves. Yeah. So when I'm talking about the choices, I am talking about those modes of development. Right. Then in the paragraphs, we're looking at contrast. We're looking at similes, metaphors. We're using also rhetorically accurate verbs because sometimes a kid is like, I know that's a metaphor. And then you'll get, he writes a metaphor. And you're like, oh. Yeah. He does.
But comparing or contrasting, come on. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this goes back to Tim. It's already stapled his essay. And then the students will get this rhetorical analysis self-evaluation rubric, which is stapled on top of their peer review.
All right,
sheet.
And so that's what this is right here.
Yeah,
so
yes,
the kids, you collect the time writing, you hand it back, okay, then they fold their paper, and they staple it, they pass it around, and all the kids are focusing on different things, so each one for each row in that sheet there. And those are actually decided by the class, which is super cool. And then they have that passed back to them, and they get this self-eval rubric, and then they're going to staple this on top, and this is the next assignment for your student.
And one of the things that I force my students to do before they're allowed to write on this rhetorical analysis eval, I make them, and every year they want to cry, I make them plug their ears, and I make them read their essay out loud.
Of course, absolutely.
I mean, I had a principal walk in for evaluation one day, and she was like, because she didn't know what I was doing. Right. And because the voices sound like little bees. Yeah. You know? So they have to read it. And for some of them, literally it takes hearing that mistake. They're like, oh, whoa, I can't believe I wrote that. And then that's when you get the things in the margins. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to write that. Right. Then we get to the self-analysis eval rubric, and that's after they've read it. I have them highlight in certain colors. If a kid doesn't have green for their topic sentence, as long as it's consistent with whatever color, like, fine. You know, I just need to know, where it is and what it is. Then in yellow, I have them highlight the evidence and their examples. Pink is for their commentary. And I tell my kids at the get-go, if yours has a lot of not pink, we need more pink. Right. So, and for my students, they understand when I say, hey, more pink. Yep. They get it. They know what I'm saying. Then they'll go through, and this is the first time when they're looking at the rubric. Yeah. This is the first time they're seeing here's how you don't get that thesis point. Here's how it is. And I asked the kids, explain why you gave yourself this score. And my students, because of all of the language that I've used in my class, they don't know it comes from the rubric. I don't tell them that it's where it comes from. I just tell them, look, this is language of the discipline. This is what we need. Right. That's what we're using. And they, I had lots of kids when they reread their paper, they'll tell me the reason they gave themselves a 0 is because they misread the prompt. Mm-hmm. Like they thought, and they're very detailed. I thought the prompt was actually about this, but here's what I wrote, so I didn't get the thesis point. And the goal here is for them to be as thoughtful as possible.
Right, and it's interesting that the first time they see the rubric, they're actually interacting with it themselves, as opposed to you
Yes.
just telling them what it is,
Yeah.
so they can actually see, hey, did I do this? But I really like this idea down here. Explain why you gave yourself the score. So the kids are actually scoring the paper before you are,
Yep.
and that's actually pretty cool too, because now the kids are not overly concerned about did I get my B or my A or whatnot. It's
Yeah.
actually, all right, let's actually look at what I'm doing here. Did I actually effectively do this? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Yeah. Row B gets tricky for them because I have these students who they're like, explain why you gave yourself the score, and they'll give themselves a 3 on their commentary, and yet they only did one of those ands.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and they're reading and they're like, okay, yes, I provided some specific evidence to support all my claims. I definitely did that. But then when we get to the commentary, the wheels fall off.
Right.
And they'll have like one sentence of pink.
Yeah.
And they'll realize, okay, you know what? I didn't explain this. And they're very specific about,
Right.
And they're kind of mean to themselves, by the way. Like,
yeah.
way harsher than we are.
Oh, for sure. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
And then the sophistication point, this is the point that my students, they're like, Lavelle, just give me one. I got
Just
a
one
4.
day.
You gave me a 4 on commentary. Why didn't you give me this point? I was like,
Yeah.
because you didn't demonstrate any of those things.
Right.
Then why'd you give me a 4 on commentary? Because your commentary is actually quite good.
Right.
Now, and then this is where we have that conversation, and I make my students watch the glass slipper conclusion video.
Which I think is like up here in the corner now.
It's up there now.
Yep.
And I'm like, guys, did you take this outside of the text?
Yeah.
Did you make it bigger than the text? And they're like, no. But I'm like, no, you literally just said no.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not giving you the point.
Right.
And the other thing too is, look, you guys know that your AP students, they hunt and peck, and they are those GPA mongers. And then there's other things at the bottom. I need you to list 3 things you think you should work on.
Yeah.
Some students will give me 10, and I'm like, no, that is not even possible. I want 3.
Right.
And I want you to list 3
meaningful,
things
measurable
you
goals
did.
here. Yeah.
I mean, they'll take forever.
Yeah.
And then 3 things you did well. Because what I want to do is, with that part, I want to make sure that I find those things that they think that they did well, and I can provide some affirmation for that.
Absolutely.
Even if I read it and I'm like, ooh, yikes, I can craft my feedback to fit so that it sounds like, you know what, I did do that well.
Right.
Because every time the first time right goes back to my kids, the average score is like a 50. But they all gave themselves 3s.
Gotcha.
On commentary. And I'm like, guys, okay. So they'll go through this. I haven't looked at the student's paper once. Now
there's a lot of thoughtfulness that's going in to this then before you actually get there.
It takes a lot. There's a bunch of front loading, but it's worth it.
Right. Okay, so then all right, the front loading happens. The kids are being reflective. They're thinking about your class. They're trying to apply your class to their peer editing. Then they're doing a self-assessment. And then what?
All right, so after that self-assessment, I take all of those things back. I take their essays. I read them. It usually takes me about a week to get them back, and they've got substantive feedback, and I allow for them to rewrite for up to full credit. I don't care about what the district policy says. You can only rewrite for 50, you can only rewrite for 70. That is a disservice to my students, I feel especially because these kids are trying. Right. So I'm like, yeah, you can write for full credit. Then they're taking, at this point, the first time that after I give them their essay back, they'll get their score. They've got my feedback on it this time. Yeah. And they've got their peers' feedback. They've got their own feedback. Now they need to go through. You're still not happy with your score? Fix it. Then I get another draft of the essay.
Now,
and it's typed.
I got to tell you, right, that I too allow for rewrites. And since I've started allowing for rewrites for full credit, I always tell the kids, I'm accountable for your skills. I don't even make the kids rewrite it in a time setting. I'm like,
Yeah,
if
no,
this
me
is what
either.
you know what's
Me
going on,
either.
because I do self reflection as well, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Um, but nonetheless, I'm like, once you get your self reflection back and you get my comments back, I'm like, you can rewrite it as many times as you want within the next 2 weeks to try
Hmm.
to get this to be better. Now, for my kids, I do warn them though. If you write a worse paper, I will
Oh,
give you a lower grade. But they almost
oh,
never do.
absolutely.
They almost never do because I'm like, look it, take your time. You've got 2 weeks. Let's get it in. Watching them build their skills because of that. But a lot of times I get the question like, doesn't that make your grading like 10 times worse or 10 times longer? And I'm like,
It doesn't.
it doesn't because I don't provide comments like that anymore, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, no, no. They got the comments the first time, but now you got to just do. To read a paper and to score it without putting comments on it, that takes me
Yeah.
like 2.5 minutes. That's not hard.
So if they have to do a rewrite the third time, that means they've gotten 2 rounds of my comments.
So
If they have to do
you'll actually provide comments the second time around as well.
I do,
Okay,
but also not all of my students choose to rewrite. Some
gotcha.
are
Flex
like,
choice thing. All right.
nailed it, got that 60. And some are like, yes, 72. And then I have those other kids. I'll have kids who will write a 4 and they're like, no, help me. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is this the first one? I'll help you. We got this. If they need a third rewrite, if they want it,
Yeah.
they have to come sit down with me
Gotcha.
because the pre-conference reflection right here, this document, they have to have this filled out before they come to me.
Gotcha.
They can't just sit their essay down and say, hey, can you help me?
Right.
No, we're beyond that.
I also really appreciate too that this is not the why did you give me the grade that I did. I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
self-reflection that goes into it before they even see your comments in your grade. And now we've got this. They can't do, students can't do that classic why did you give me the grade that we did because
And
it's not like we want to.
yeah.
We just want kids to be reflective because that's how we're going to learn. We're not curmudgeons here. So I really appreciate how this looks here. So anyway, why don't you tell us about this? I'm sorry for cutting you off again.
No, it's fine. So, the student reflection form, look, name, date, what's their tutoring time? For me, I have to have tutoring days, but I live at school.
Yeah.
So, except for Fridays, on Fridays, I don't know you. I'm running out of the building. You can chase me if you want, but I'm not looking at that essay. But for the rhetorical analysis, this is the writing conference, and it's still student reflection. But this time, like, there's clearly an error. So if you'll scroll down, the stuff on the left, the do not use.
Yep.
This is where I tell the kids, I don't care about you, man. I care about you and your soul, but I don't care about you and your I thinks.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
I love you as a human, but the I think, no. And maybe get rid of them.
Yeah.
And if I've got a student who's still using that, they don't understand formal academic writing in the way that we're asking them to write it.
Okay.
So those things I'm not going to address.
Yeah.
On the other side, other things to check out for, and I'll have definitely said, why are you? I'll have written many times, why are you still using the author uses? Come
Yeah,
on,
get them to those verbs. That's gonna be.
you've
that's
got
really helpful,
rhetorically
yeah.
accurate verbs, and I'll tell them it's on page 23 of your yellow pages. You have the whole chart right there of rhetorically accurate verbs that you can use.
Right.
And so they'll go through that, and then if you'll scroll down,
Yep.
and so I use the précis.
Yep. A lot of people
But
do,
I
by the way.
flipped it to use your thesis statement template. Because for my kids, they come to me, I would say pretty unprepared for what's about to hit them in AP language. The précis, it forces them to recognize who the audience is.
Yeah.
It forces them to understand the context. Like if
Right.
they're giving you a date, 1774, what's going on?
Right.
What's happening? And so this is the things they need to do. Like, and these are weird terms that we use in our class, and the terms aren't important.
Yeah.
It's just, again, this is the process that the students are going through. And if you need to make sure you have these. And SPACE is, for those of you who use Space Cat, it's speaker, purpose, audience, context, and exigence.
Yep.
We had a teacher who she's like, we're not going to teach exigence because the kids don't get it. I'm like, yes, they do get it.
Oh, for sure.
They're bright.
Yeah.
And so we're using this part, and if you'll scroll down, I think there's a couple of questions for the kids to answer.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Pre-conference. What do you think you need to work on? Again, they have to go back into their work that they've got my comments and their peers, because maybe one more look at the pre-conference reflection. Yeah. Then the next thing, what do you need to keep doing? Again, that's tied back to what are the 3 things that you're doing well. Mm-hmm. And they're taking notes while I'm talking about their paper. It's a conversation now. Yeah. And then what do you need to stop doing? I've already told them what to stop doing, but sometimes they need to hear it. Right. To be like, oh my God, now I get it. And then post-reflection, 1 or 2 areas that for your next essay that you want to work on. Mm-hmm. And then after they go through this, they rewrite it 1 more time. And at that point, it's straight score. I use this stamp. Yes, I have a stamp very similar to that. I don't know how to grade anymore without the stamp. I know, just put it on and circle it up. Now, the pre-conference forum, you'll actually sit down and talk to your student about this essay this time. So now not only have they received your written feedback up to 2 times, now you've got the verbal feedback with the essay itself. We've got self-reflection, multiple times throughout the process here. And I can't imagine that this is not a successful process most of the time when you think about how much self-reflection is involved here. And I will say, we don't just stop here. We continue on to the next set of readings and stuff. Right. I give them a week to get me that first rewrite back. We didn't stop the course here. We're still covering our next piece. Yes. We're still talking about, and because my course is insanely aligned with AP US history. Yep. 1, I'm trying to get the kids to bring in some sophistication that they didn't even know is sophisticated, but they can talk about that broader context. We haven't stopped. We're still doing this. And so I'll get 3 or 4 essays, back. And then that second week, I'll get 3 or 4 more. But, after a couple weeks, it's got to stop because they'll have already written their next timed right. Right. And so for me, mine is typically about 2 weeks. I'm like, you got 2 weeks to do your rewrite. And I don't go through as many processes as you do for this. But nonetheless, the idea of allowing kids to revise, and that actually helps with the revision process without having them always thinking that they have to write like a formal paper all the time. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have to have 25 formal papers in AP Lang. I can have 1 or 2, but the kids can still learn the revision process and the final product process by going through all of this as well. So, no, I think that this is great, and I think that it really helps the kids be self-reflective, and I think that it gets them involved. And the kids that don't want to do it, they don't have to, but you have the option for the kids that do, and that's how we can really help kids to encourage them to kind of glean those skills. Yes. And I think that my students who choose not to do it the first time, they look at all of the work and feedback that I give, and they're mad. Well, why didn't you make me do it? Because you're almost an adult. Right. Yeah. I'm not gonna. It's an academic choice you made. Yeah. Absolutely. And you do force the peer editing side of it before that first feedback comes through. So it's we could start the process, but there are times when we do have to make choices, and we have to teach kids that they have to make choices as well. And the peer editing feedback that I found is sometimes students need to see other kids work. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In a non-judgmental format. Yeah. And, I know that you also have this same exact type of thing for argument as well, and I assume you have it for synthesis, so the same process stays the same. I noticed that you mentioned, and I'm just going to mention this super quick, I noticed that you mentioned that your AP Lang and your AP US are aligned really closely. In fact, just so everybody else that's paying attention knows, Brea gave me a document of how they have aligned such things, and we're going to get that up on the Garden of English website at some point this year. I don't really know when, just because of a bunch of other stuff that I'm doing, but I do have that, and I appreciate that, Brea, and we're going to get that out to people
when the time comes. We'll get that up on the website, hopefully before Christmas, but we'll see. But
Yeah, I mean, teachers are always asking, how should I structure my course?
Yeah.
And I found that by doing it that way, I get better essays because the kids finally can get some of that sophistication in there when they're bringing in a greater understanding of really who that audience is and that background piece.
And,
and it also helps their APER scores.
Yeah, absolutely. So you double dip on that, and it works out really, really well. I completely agree. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm just going to share what I do here for feedback and self-evaluation, not peer evaluation. I know that you had talked about how you put your substantive comments on the papers after the kids have done their peer eval and whatnot and their self-eval. For me, I actually just use these comment codes right here. And just so everybody knows, all of these documents will be linked down below in the description. And you can do what you want with them. But I got comment codes from Gretchen Polnick and Brendan Kenny when I was younger. And when I did, I took those comment codes and I was like, wow, I write a lot of these same comments, and I made them my own, and I put my own lingo in here. And you can access those. But when the kids are doing their papers, I just put the numbers on their papers near where the problems are or where the good parts are. And the even numbers are like, hey, cool comments. And the odd numbers are like, you got to do better than that kind of comments. And the kids count them up. How many even numbers do I have? How many odd numbers do I have? And when they do that, I ask them to look for patterns. Patterns for the even, patterns for the odd. And then I make them comment on why some of their evens, especially their commentary, work out well. And then, hey, what's wrong with when your commentary kind of suffers? That's what a 9A, 9B, or 9C is. And so they're doing these reflections on this, and then I just make them write an action plan for the next time that they write their essay. So all of my students are going to do a reflection, but I do not make every student rewrite. But if the kids take the reflection pretty seriously, they're going to notice, hey, here's what I can keep. It's those even numbers. Here's what I need to work on. It's those odd numbers. I have to write out an action plan anyway, and because Freitas is letting me revise, then perhaps I should be able to actually make an action plan because of that. And so the kids will, the students will do it. And when that happens, a lot of times the kids will rewrite, and I'll get a paper. And I would suggest that 9.5 times out of 10, the second revision is better. And if they don't like it, I'm like, look, you still got 2 weeks. So let's say they turn it in 2 days later and I score it and they don't like it. I'm like, well, you still got a week and a half left. Yep. So they can do it again for me as many times as they want for that. So nonetheless, right, I really appreciate your time here going over your kind of peer editing feedback and self-reflection. I really appreciate the metacognition that your kids get to engage with in your classroom. For everybody who's watching, if this video was helpful for you at all, I'm going to ask that you just click like and subscribe. You can see that right underneath the video. Just click on that because we're trying to always bring in, or at least I'm trying to always bring in other teachers that have really awesome practices so that we can work to support you. You can support the Garden of English just by going to thegardenofenglish.com. We sell merch. We also work with a couple other partner companies like Perfection and Parlay and Applied Practice who do awesome things all in their own. So feel free to check out any of the affiliate links down below for that as well. Brielle, it was an absolute pleasure to be able to work with you here today and to get into some really cool ideas that I could take into my classroom for peer feedback and self-evaluation and even self-reflection. Well,
thanks for letting me.
Oh, no doubt. I appreciate you having you here, and I'm sure that we'll talk sooner rather than later.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, have a great night.